As the Second World War ended, the RAF was in good shape as a service. Despite the deaths of over 70,000 personnel, the majority from Bomber Command, it employed around 1,200,000 men and women, with over 9,000 aircraft. However, just like at the end of the First World War, and despite being on the winning side again, Britain was exhausted by nearly 6 years of conflict. The country was in debt, its towns and cities ruined by bombing, and the population had to put up with even stricter rationing than in wartime. The new Labour government promised to change the country, and in 1948 set up the National Health Service with free healthcare for all. But all this meant rapid cuts to defence spending, as soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women serving in the armed forces returned to civilian life. The wartime RAF was hastily dismantled, and many of its aircraft just scrapped. It lost 900,000 people, and fighter command was reduced to just 200 planes. The politicians assumed that there was little prospect of a major war breaking out again soon. This was quickly proved wrong. Tensions increased between the wartime allies, the United States and the Soviet Union, as the latter took over Eastern Europe. This tension developed into a Cold War, where both sides attracted allies to support them and built up their military capacity. Western countries founded the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949, and Britain remained a key ally of the United States. In 1947, national service was introduced, where able-bodied young men were conscripted into the armed forces for 2 years, including into the RAF. At first, the United States had the advantage of possessing atomic bombs, which it had already dropped on Japanese cities in 1945. However, it was only a matter of time before the Soviets obtained a bomb of their own. In 1947, the British government decided to develop its own nuclear bombs to deter a Soviet attack. They would be entrusted to the RAF, which rapidly expanded again in the early 1950s. In 1950, it had 4,500 aircraft, which rose to 6,338 within 2 years. Second World War aircraft were replaced with jet fighters, some of which could carry air-to-air missiles. Bombers, capable of dropping a nuclear payload, took 8 years to develop. The most famous of these, the Vulcan, entered service in 1956. It was capable of flying behind the Iron Curtain at high altitude and of destroying Soviet cities. The Vulcan could carry blue steel, a nuclear missile that could be fired hundreds of miles from its target. But unlike the 1920s after the First World War, Britain was now less powerful as a country in its own right. It could no longer afford its worldwide empire, and gradually gave independence to many colonies as they demanded it. In 1947, Britain's Indian Empire was partitioned into the new independent states of India and Pakistan. Despite this, the British government still saw the United Kingdom as a great power, willing to use force independently to retain its remaining territories and protect the country's interests around the world from different military bases. Sometimes Britain's role as a key ally of the United States in the struggle to contain the spread of communism coincided with its effort to keep certain valuable colonies. From 1948, the RAF saw action against Chinese communist insurgents in the jungles of the rubber-rich colony of Malaya. Even after Malaya became independent in 1957, the RAF continued to operate there, protecting the new democracy from the same insurgents. In 1956, the government of Egypt seized the Suez Canal from British and French control. The canal was a major trading route, and the British and French decided they wanted it back. Without telling the United States, their most powerful ally, the governments plotted secretly with Egypt's enemy, the State of Israel. Israel was encouraged to attack Egypt across the Sinai Peninsula, and then Britain and France invaded the Canal Zone. They claimed to come as peacemakers to separate Egyptian and Israeli forces. In fact, they had come to take back the canal. The Suez Campaign was a British military success. The RAF bombed Egyptian air bases, destroying 250 aircraft with no losses. But the Americans were furious and demanded the withdrawal of British and French forces. The Soviet Union threatened nuclear war. Internationally humiliated, Britain never again took such military action without the consent or support of the United States. The Suez Crisis strongly divided British public opinion. The end of Britain's role as an independent great power also gave the government the excuse it needed to slash expensive defence spending. In an age of nuclear weapons, conventional forces were thought to be almost irrelevant. The RAF was cut back again. The development of new aircraft was mostly scrapped. All military operations were now assessed for whether they were really necessary.